Joining us now on this, GOP Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. She's been busy. I've seen you all over television today. Thank you so much for joining us. I just wanted to get your reaction to this. This just happened a little bit ago.
Well, the hypocrisy is so real. My son still has to wear a mask at school. My daughter still has to wear a mask at school. It does impede learning. I mean, I'm just going to say anybody with common sense knows when you can't see the teacher's lips, it's very hard to learn if you're back in the classroom. This is affecting our kids. We know kids are very immune to COVID. They have strong immune systems. And so for the Democrats to continue to do this, and suddenly it's okay if Democrat governors do it, but it was bad if Republican governors do it, just shows their hypocrisy. It's on full display for the American people.
Yeah, and this is not something that you can dress up and hide from folks. I mean, they saw this administration go after Ron DeSantis particularly relentlessly because he's such a threat. Yes, and Glenn Youngkin. And Glenn Youngkin, I mean, that was an election that was a repudiation of those mandates in part. Really huge. This other thing that was addressed in this press conference today, the Washington Free Beacon ran a story. They had Health and Human Services on record talking about, and I thought we were going to have flying cars and like a cure for diseases, but instead we're talking about free crack pipes. And I just cannot believe that this is a topic of conversation, but it is. And Jen Psaki was asked about, it was the harm reduction plan that the administration is coming out with. It also includes syringes verbatim. I was looking at the actual plan on the government website. But the smoking kits that they had, HHS said verbatim to Washington Free Beacon that these include pipes to smoke crack cocaine and meth because they feel like helping people do drugs is going to reduce people's drug use insanely. And so during this same presser, Jen Psaki is denying this. This is a $30 million taxpayer-funded government program. I'm shocked and I'm almost without words, and that's a rare thing. What are your thoughts on this? How are Republicans pushing back on this nonsense? We want our money back.
So I think anyone who came up with the plan to spend $30 million to give drug addicts crack pipes must have been smoking a crack pipe. I mean, I think it is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I think the American people are just going to go nuts when they hear $30 million was going to this. Tom Cotton has a great Twitter feed on this right now. It is just insane. We know we have a drug problem in this country, not just with crack and other things that we're seeing with our homeless population, but they're allowing it to pour across our border. A 13-year-old a couple weeks ago just died of fentanyl in Connecticut. I mean, this is something that is affecting every community. And the Biden administration shows over and over and over again, they don't care. And this policy exemplifies that.
And also, we're talking with Ronna McDaniel, GOP Chairwoman. Drug use went sky high during lockdown, and people are still coming to terms with new addictions that were either they were in turn, partially created because everybody was locked down, or maybe people relapsed during this. I mean, there's so much data about relapses and drug use and drug overdoses. And you would just think that maybe some of these restrictions, if they're so concerned about saving lives, Johns Hopkins study shows that a lot of these lockdown and mandate restrictions didn't do anything to mitigate coronavirus fatalities. Maybe instead, just approach it but that science apparently doesn't suit them.
No, it doesn't. And there is a mental health pandemic that's come out of this. These draconian measures that the Democrats have put forward, suicide rates are up, drug use is up. And the money that they're sending back to the states, especially to the schools, it's all going to the unions and to things that have nothing to do with the mental health of the kids. So let's get rid of the masks. Let's follow the science. And let's make sure we're helping these kids who've been really, really hurt in states like mine. My son was virtual for a year and a half. My son's still wearing a mask in school. It's just time to start putting the kids first. And the Democrats have really revealed themselves. It's not about the kids. It's about the unions.
It is very much so. Talking with GOP Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel, Republicans are in a really good position going into midterms. And I always get nervous when everything looks this good because there's always, you know exactly what I'm going. There's always this infighting. You've had to address this a lot in the past couple of days because there was the resolution at the meeting in Utah, the winter meeting with Republicans in Utah, where Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney were censured mainly because they were on this January 6th committee. Apparently Senator Mitch McConnell was not happy with that. He said it wasn't the job of the RNC to single out members, but it did feel as though to a lot of people that you really can't have Republican members of Congress singling out voters as well, which a lot of people felt that Cheney and Kinzinger were doing. So what is your take on Mitch McConnell's response to this?
Well, I'm very united in winning back the Senate and the House. And I think Republicans should stay united. But the Republican National Committee, we represent the grassroots. These are volunteers. These are hardworking individuals who donate their time. And the reason that they passed this resolution isn't because we can't have disagreements. We can disagree in our party. It's because Kevin McCarthy was not allowed to put his people on that committee. Nancy Pelosi prevented Republicans from putting their people on the committee. And Kinzinger and Cheney said, okay, we'll give you a pass. We don't care. This has never happened in the history of our party. And now this committee, the scope has gone so far that 90% of the subpoenas have gone to people who are not at the Capitol on January 6th. Wow. Some of them are RNC members. One of them is a very close friend of mine. She just lost her husband. It's been devastating for her. She wasn't even DC on January 6th. The legal fees, the intimidation, and they right now have a committee where they have no allies. There's no Republicans sticking up for them. There's no voices or advocates on this committee. It is totally unchecked. And that's where Liz and Adam are really being called out by the RNC. It's a different dialogue than just having a difference of opinion. It's actually going and working with Nancy Pelosi to target Republicans.
Well, and we're talking with Ronna McDaniel, GOP chair, and that's kind of the big thing here. I mean, when all of this happened with January 6th, because I know that there were a ton of people there. There were hundreds of thousands of people, I think, that had showed out. And there were a group of people that broke away. And this group of people that broke away, there were people who got violent in that group. And I don't think that anybody is against. That's one thing where the right's been consistent on. I don't think anybody is against prosecuting people who think that violence or property destruction is a form of protected speech, because it's not. But what gets me is some of the language, because here we're dealing with runaway inflation. The horrible approval, or lack thereof, I should say, for Joe Biden's coming out. That should be like, and we've talked about it, in my defense, we've talked about it a lot on the show. But instead we have, and I don't say this as someone who dislikes Mitch McConnell. I think that Trump would not have had the judicial agenda that he had for the second part of his term without Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is a parliamentarian master. He's like Game of Thrones. However, he also used the phrase insurrection when he was talking about this. He's like, well, it was a violent insurrection, but nobody was charged for that. There was no insurrection charges. The FBI report even said that, there was no organization. Marco Rubio had said a violent mob. There was a mob that broke away, a violent mob of people, which seems that's better language. But Mitch McConnell using this kind of language, doesn't that, it seems to help Democrats more than it does Republicans. And he's got to remember the people he's describing are voting for him.
I think that the real issue with the RNC was Liz and Adam, really, and what they did. And the courts are going to take care of the people who broke into the Capitol. And, the media, what bothers me the most is Republicans don't buy into what the media is saying when they say legitimate political discourse. Newsflash, legitimate political discourse doesn't include violence. Remember, the RNC had a bomb placed outside of our building on January 6th. I don't see this committee addressing that. I don't see them talking about, we haven't caught the person that placed a live bomb outside of the Republican National Committee headquarters on January 6th. And we know the Democrats want to use this January 6th commission to keep it going until before the election. They've told their Democrat media partners, keep this in the news. This is how we're going to win. We don't want to talk about Biden. And instead of committees on Afghanistan and the Wuhan virus and all the other things that our country is facing, this is what the Democrats are focusing on because it's political. And Liz and Adam are aiding and abetting that and allowing them to do that, and allowing really average Republicans who weren't there and weren't committing violence to be intimidated and face major legal fees from this committee. And, in a jury, in a court, you get a jury of your peers. Right now, every Republican is facing a jury of enemies, of people who do not have your back. Yeah. And we're really losing due process from this January 6th committee.
We're talking to GOP Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. Have you instructed some of the, whether they be in Senate or in the House of Representatives, look, can we refine our language that we're using? Because I think the best response that some of these Republican members should have is, well, as you were just saying, we didn't have a committee when we were looking at all of the violence and the buildings that were burned and the cars that were burned during the 2016 inauguration. We didn't have a committee that looked into people wearing red hats assaulted all over the country in droves. We didn't have any committees for that. Are we going to include investigations into that? And they could even bring up, some of the BLM riots, et cetera. And I don't think I or anybody else has a problem with calling out, that violent section. But man, it just seems that when you have someone that has the authority in the statute of Mitch McConnell using that kind of language, I get nervous because I don't know who else in the Senate could take over for him. And I don't want our party. I don't want what we want to get done on the calendar to get screwed over because he used the word insurrection. I want him to not say that anymore.
I think we need to be, I think we do need to all be aware of what's happening with this committee. And I do think not everybody in the Senate and the House is aware of the breadth and depth of the people getting subpoenas and what this is meaning in their lives and the lack of representation they have. I mean, that's the problem. And that's where these RNC members, especially with this one woman we all know and love, to see her and the burden this is placing on her life. It's crazy. Personal.
Yeah, there are people who weren't even near there that are getting.
She was in Florida. She wasn't even there. And so, here she just loses her husband. And this is who we're going after? An elderly farmer, woman, widow from the RNC instead of China, instead of Russia, instead of finding out why our men and women are left behind in Afghanistan. This is what we're spending our time on. And I think Republicans are really saying that enough is enough.
Yeah.
And let's not fall into this trap of legitimizing a committee that is not legitimate anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. One last question for you. So we've seen the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa.
Yeah.
There's organization going for a Freedom Convoy. Could see a Freedom Convoy in D.C. Now, I've seen everybody try to January 6th up the one that's in Ottawa and Saskatchewan and elsewhere. They're going to try that if they see it. They're going to do. Keep in mind, I mean, it doesn't matter what political affiliation these truckers are. These are just truckers of, from all walks of life. They're going to try to do the same thing with truckers if they organize something like this for D.C. How is the Republican Party going to position a response to that? Because that addresses everything. It addresses the virus, the mandates, inflation, so much more, without kind of falling into the, like I feel like Liz Cheney's fighting ghosts of the past. The GOP definitely can't do that. How are they going to position? How are you going to position that if that were to happen in DC?
Yeah, obviously we wouldn't support violence, but listen, I'm on the border of Ontario, right here in Michigan. Canada is literally 30 minutes away. I know exactly what this means for Canada and the U.S. And these truckers were frontline workers. Let's not forget. These were people who kept our economy going. The RNC sued against the vaccine mandate. We will be behind this. We don't want to see frontline workers and hardworking Americans punished because of Democrat policies that are going to continue to shut down our supply chains, shut down our economy, kill jobs, and ruin families' lives. I mean, people are losing businesses and losing their livelihood because of these supply chain issues and the gas prices as well. So we need our truckers. We're going to be behind our truckers.
There we go. Well, we'll be watching to see. Ronna McDaniel, GOP Chairwoman, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for your time today. Good
Thanks
to see
for
you.
having me, Dana.
Of course.